Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 8 of Neon Genesis Evangelion. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So once again, we start off with a conversation between Gendo and somebody, and it sounds kinda shady. Meanwhile, Kensuke is really enjoying being friends with Shinji. Shinji's taken Toji and Kensuke, and they're sort of hitching along with Misato, who's on, presumably, some kind of official business. So Misato sort of coyly remarked that they're just gonna go take a ride on this little boat. But it turns out the boat in question is very likely an aircraft carrier. And it's not alone. There's a whole host of aircraft carriers and battleships. It's a pretty remarkable fleet, all things considered. Kensuke, being the military fanatic that he is really enjoying himself seeing all the ordnance and other military equipment on the aircraft carrier. So we meet a new character here who already seems familiar with Misato. As it turns out, she is the second child, and therefore an Evangelion pilot. So Asuka is initially apt to meet the third child, but she's quickly disappointed by Shinji's appearance. So already what sort of stable dynamic there was between the characters, everything is very likely to be quickly upset with the addition of Asuka, who is, I guess to put it mildly, disagreeable. So interestingly enough, this fleet is apparently transporting one of the Evangelions. And the captain or admiral or whoever the commanding officer is, he's none too happy that the entire Pacific fleet is essentially relegated to guard duty. But that this is the case really speaks to the true value of an Evangelion. So the situation seems to have been complicated further by the introduction of this guy named Kaji. Asuka is happy to see him. Misato is not. Kaji and Misato seem to have a prior relationship, and while Kaji certainly seems happy, or at least not unhappy to see her, the same can't be said for Misato, who's very distant. So Kaji offers Shinji some praise about how he managed to pilot Unit 1 on his first go without any training. And it really seems like... Well, it doesn't seem like Asuka shot him a dirty look, but it really seems like she's very jealous by that praise Shinji was getting. So Asuka seems to want to show off her Evangelion to Shinji. So Asuka is very quick to sort of throw her weight around here. And she declares that Unit 0 was a prototype, Unit 1 was a sort of test, and only Unit 2, her Evangelion, is an actual production model, and therefore is better. And because her model is better, she is also better by dint of being given a proper Evangelion. While that seems to track, whether it's true in practical terms, that's not really clear yet. So, something has happened. Presumably an angel is attacking, and Asuka is all too happy to get an excuse to show off. So interestingly, despite Misato sort of pulling rank on the captain before, saying if something happens, I'm in charge, he's not relinquishing authority just yet, and he's trying to fire torpedoes at what is presumably an angel, which is Of course, a useless gesture, given how much stronger ordnance failed to affect the angel we saw in episode 1. Technically, I believe that was the third angel, although I don't think it was ever referred to as such. So Asuka suits up in her plug suit, and for reasons unknown, presumably she just wants to show off to Shinji, she puts him in a plug suit and tells him, hey, you're happening this with me. Interestingly enough, this entire sortie is entirely unauthorized. Asuka's acting entirely on her own. Which, in my mind, I wouldn't trust the judgment of a young teenager for military matters. So Kaji's talking to somebody on the phone, presumably Gendo, and Gendo indicates that it was no accident that there was an Evangelion and a second pilot on hand. So back with Asuka and Shinji, Asuka's trying to start up the Evangelion, but the issue is, due to having to synchronize with the pilot, Asuka's trying to do everything in German, but unfortunately, the language barrier is inhibiting the Evangelion from starting properly. Of course, Asuka treats that like it's Shinji deliberately sabotaging her, even though that can't possibly be the case. So Misato and the captain are all but coming to blows about whether or not Unit 2 should start up. Strangely enough, Misato's for it. You wouldn't think she would be up for that sort of maverick behavior, but given all the other equipment is insubstantial in the face of the Angel, Unit 2 is really the only thing that can stand up to it in a fight. Now, I like this little bit right here because the tarp that had been covering Unit 2 is just sort of shrouded about it like a cloak. I think it looks pretty cool. So at this point, Asuka's playing for keeps. Unit 2 only has about a minute of reserve power, and the Angel's underwater. If they sink, they're in big trouble. I'd imagine an Evangelion is very dense and very heavy, and therefore probably prone to sink straight to the bottom of the ocean. So they're sort of hopping ship by ship towards a power source, but in the process, they're doing massive damage to the aircraft carriers and the battleships. Fortunately, they do manage to switch over to non-battery power. So, in that sense, they're in much better shape. So the Angel sort of jumps up onto the aircraft carrier where Unit 2 is standing. They're sort of grappling before the Angel manages to drag Unit 2 underwater. So Misato claims that fighting underwater is impossible, but Asuka is willing to give it a try, notably. And I think the interesting thing here is that underwater there's the ruins of what appears to be a giant metropolitan city. So the second impact really changed the geography of the world, regardless of whether or not it was actually a meteor strike, which at this point we know it wasn't. So the Angel's just dragging Unit 2 around underwater, and Unit 2 is on a very short leash due to its power cable. So just like how he mentioned on the phone with Gendo, Kaji is taking his leave on a plane. Misato takes this as a rather selfish action on his part, even though he was offering the excuse of having to make a delivery. So back with Asuka and Shinji, things immediately go wrong, because apparently the type of equipment they're using isn't suitable for underwater combat. Asuka immediately asks Shinji what he's gonna do, because he's the famous third child. So that's something that's sort of endemic to her character. She's very confident up until things go wrong, and then when things go wrong, usually due to her own overconfidence, she starts foisting responsibility onto other people. I guess in that sense, she's a very realistic character. I know plenty of people like that. So Misato has a cunning plan for how to deal with the Angel. The Admirable isn't exceptionally willing to follow along, but given the circumstances, he doesn't really have much of a choice but to comply. Essentially, 2 battleships are gonna go on a suicide run. Essentially, they're hoping to lure the Angel into being rammed by the sinking battleships that'll then self-destruct. So even as Shinji's trying to salvage the situation, Asuka is still nagging him about trivial things when their lives are on the line, ostensibly. So essentially, only by sort of pooling their effort together are Shinji and Asuka able to sort of do anything. Of course, they couldn't come to this conclusion without Asuka saying, "Don't get any funny ideas," as if Shinji would take this opportunity for his own personal gain. The 2 battleships glide directly into the mouth of the angel and they fire all their forward cannons at it internally. Fortunately, it seems to have worked. And Unit 2 got off not unscathed, but certainly could have been worse for it. So after they get out of the Evangelion, Asuka is very eager to see him, but that's not the case, unfortunately. He's already gone. Kaji and Gendo meet up, and they're here to talk about the contents of a case. And it looks like an embryo of sorts. Gendo refers to it as the first human, Adam. So Toji and Kensuke mention that they're glad they won't have to see Asuka anymore, and they feel sorry for Shinji, but unfortunately for all involved, Asuka is their new classmate. Alright, that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one.